The Cleveland Guardians are losing their third coach in 4 months. I am very thankful. It is not 4 coaches in 4 months, though. We will talk about who they lost, who is staying, as well as getting into some ways this team can improve on today's episode of Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the show today. I am Jeff Ellis, your host of Locked On Guardians, as I have been since this podcast began 6 years ago. Before that, I was national writer at Scout and 24/7 focused on prospects in the draft. What is Locked On Guardians? It is a proud part of the Locked On Podcasting Network. It is a show that covers your Cleveland Guardians from the majors to the minors to the draft and everything in between. We get into the nitty gritty of the Guardians and baseball in a way that no other podcast can do, because no other podcast is 5 days a week. I want to thank you for taking the time to make today's episode your first listen today and every day, wherever it is you get podcasts. A big shout out to all of the everydayers, all of the insiders. You are the true insiders if you are listening right now in the doldrums of the offseason. We do have some things to talk about, though. We have coaching changes and coaching stays, so it's not all doldrums. But it's a time of year, especially, I guess I just did, you can tell, trick-or-treating with my kids today. For all the listeners out there, are you celebrating Halloween on Halloween? Or the Halloween events for adults without young kids next weekend? Were they this weekend? Are you a little more tired? Let me know below. Do you want to take a second and say today's episode is brought to you by Game Time? Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. On today's show, we are going to talk about the coach who stayed, the coach who left, and just all the continued brain drain for an organization that is always suffering from brain drain, it feels like. Talk about the Fielding Bible Awards and some other ways that maybe Cleveland could improve this team outside of some of the more obvious things we've already talked about. And then I asked you last week on my solo shows, what do you want more of? What do you miss? What do I not do as much as I used to do? And the comments responded the MLB Draft. They liked when I talked some draft history. I like doing that as well. So we're going to talk about the longest draft in Guardians/Indians history, 1993. A draft that is a weird one on a lot of levels. We'll get into all of it, but it is one that definitely stands out. And that last pick they took, they signed him. Very unusual for a draft back in the old rules and days. Let's start with the positive. Carl Willis is staying. That's really important. To me, I'd rather have Willis stay and Albernaz go than the other way around. Now, I would rather neither of them went. And in terms of, if you're like, who are the coaches that left? Let's just refresh. So we go back to July. Jason Esposito, one of their major league hitting coaches, goes to Vanderbilt. Now people are going to be like, oh, they can't hit. We've got the people in the comments who like to make the jokes about just how bad this offense is. And I'm not trying to say the offense is good. Don't get me wrong. It is interesting for all the complaints that they need more power. They were 20th in power last year. I went and looked at it. Now, the slugging percentage, they were second worst. So that's interesting. But they actually had the 20th most home runs in baseball a year ago. I didn't expect that. More than the Brewers, who made the NLCS just to get destroyed by the Dodgers. But yeah, they actually weirdly had some degree of power. Not what I expected, but not saying it was good. But Vanderbilt is a top 10 college program for a reason, rather consistently. They have money to spend, and they chose Esposito to be their guy. Yes, he had ties to the organization having played there, and that helps, but that also speaks to how good and smart that person is. They're not going to go out and hire a bum. Okay, let's just make that statement and move on. Kirkreit went to be the bench coach at the Mets. Guy who's came up, coaching with Cleveland before, went to the Giants, was a bench coach. Got a lot of credit for helping Jose after his rough start. He was kind of a defense and base running extraordinaire coach for Cleveland. And then the actual bench coach was Craig Albernaz, who got last year. We thought, the Marlins might end up hiring him. And rather than lose him, it seemed like Cleveland maybe gave him a little more money and bumped him up to the associate manager title. Now, Albernaz and Vogt are very tight. Albernaz actually was one of their candidates. He interviewed to be a head coach with Cleveland. And then when they went with Vogt, they brought in Albernaz. And that was part of, Vogt had only ever been a bullpen coach. Albernaz had coached through the minors. Correa had a lot of experience as well. So they gave Vogt, two experienced, coaches who had coached at varying levels, had a lot of experience by giving Correa and Albernaz. Now both are gone. So that's also some experience drain. Now he's entering his third year. He doesn't necessarily need the most experienced bench coaches, but I'm sure that helped. I don't think there's any way that having that type of experience when all he had been is a bullpen coach. That is, he didn't have the wealth of experience. It had to be extremely helpful. Albernaz goes to the Baltimore Orioles. It's going to be interesting. He's entering with a team that has expectations. This is not a team that's going to be willing to rebuild. He's a fiery guy. We'll see how it goes there, but he's going to go. And then the bigger question is, who leaves? Now, Albernaz had coached up and down the minors. He's been with a few organizations. There's no guarantee that anyone leaves from Cleveland, but I would think there's probably going to be more brain drain coming on the horizon as Albernaz fills in his staff. Not to mention, we still haven't heard, like, Matt Foreman's interviewed for a few jobs and get the Nationals job. He's interviewed in Colorado. He's a finalist for that job from what we have heard. So I think they named, like, the report had 4 finalists. Foreman is one of them. Cleveland has lost so many coaches over the years. I mean, if we just talk pitching coaches alone, Matt Blake with the Yankees, Brian Sweeney with the Royals, Ruben Niebla with the Padres. I'm sure I'm forgetting others. But it's just they're constantly having this brain drain. And one of the important things now that they have 2 openings is I feel like they might do internal hires or at least like one internal promotion. But one of the things they've been very good about is you can't just be, internal. You need to bring in new trains of thought, new approaches, new thought processes. And I think something they excel at is integrating the external, like getting new minds in, getting new coaches and new thoughts and helping to, ingrain some of that external. Like, I think back to James Harris, who was someone who had a like physiology and like body science stuff, right? As they were kind of starting to do more with like, body metrics and things like that. And I'm sure I'm getting some of the data not exactly right, but, he had been an NFL guy at points as well as an MLB guy. So they've always been really good about taking data, taking thoughts, taking just ways to think and not being afraid of differences, instead trying to integrate those differences to be successful. And when you're, a bottom 5 market in size, which Cleveland is, and when you're a team that, is always going to be in the bottom 5 to 10 in salary, you have to find different ways to be successful, different ways to approach that are going to allow you to stay near the top of the game, which is what they've been. They've won a ton of games. I know people will be like, it doesn't matter because they haven't won in the postseason. Last 20 years, there's been 2 small market teams who won the World Series. You got 2 of the biggest markets in baseball right now in there. It's a stacked unfair game. Let's be real honest about that. It's a extremely stacked unfair game. But for Cleveland to stay competitive, they have to kind of stay smart. They have to stay with how they have approached it, and they're going to keep getting rated. This is, next, when Justin and I are sitting down, he's much better with the micro than I am. So I'm sure we'll go through some, micro candidates, some people who could move up the line into those roles potentially. But it's always interesting to see who they promote. I don't know if either of us would have thought Grant Fink, even though we both thought well of him, was the guy they were going to promote a year ago to hitting coach. So, it's just part of what they do is they're very good at identifying talent and identifying coaching talent. And we know this specifically because everyone gets hired away, and we're going to see more loss. This is just the beginning. I'd be surprised if there's at least a coach or 2 that goes with Albernaz. The one guy I don't want to see go. There's a lot of guys, let's be honest. But one of the guys that jumps out is JT McGuire. We've just heard a lot about his help he's done with the outfielders. And, he's also a base running coach. And with the loss of Kai Correa, who was also a base running coach and also a defensive coach, more of an infield guy still, I'd rather not see a double down in that area where they lose 2 coaches focused in one area. Let's talk a little more Carl Willis. It's his job as long as he wants it. He seems happy. He seems content. Justin and I both think Brad Goldberg is a pitching coach waiting to happen. Hopefully they don't lose him at some point in the next few years. But whenever the time comes for Carl Willis to step aside, to have someone who we think is going to be excellent, but it is better to maintain the continuity. The pitching is so important to this team that having the guy that all the pitchers on this team believe in, count in, and trust implicitly, I think is huge. So keeping Willis is great. Losing Craig Albernaz, it just felt like a matter of time. He, got chances with Cleveland. He interviewed with Miami. We thought it would happen. Now he's going to Baltimore. Cleveland's just going to keep losing coaches. That's unfortunately the way of it because they have a smart organization and hire smart minds. We're going to come back and talk about the Fielding Bible Awards and talk about Cleveland and how they can improve in some different ways. The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Cavs, I know they won today and yesterday for those listening. Matchup, they had a great season a year ago. They're one of the favorites in the East. Always a team to pay attention to this time of year. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Hold the phone here. $300. We bring it up all the time. They have never hit $300 in bonus bets before. That is a new high, so there's never been a better time. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us, coming back in. So let's talk about the Fielding Bible Awards. The Fielding Bible are, it's a set of awards voted on by a group of very smart people. It's using the kind of Fielding Bible metrics, where they talk about the overall defensive run saved for each individual position and players. I'm just trying to pull up the official email because that's on my phone, which is not near me. I had it set there, but on the official email, they had a great quote just about like how consistent this team is and how near the top they are in terms of the overall Fielding Bible Awards every year. I believe Stephen Kwan tied for the highest defensive run saved this year of any player. He is, he didn't win it last year, so he's won it 3 of the last 4 years. And he was 10 more than the next closest left fielder. Yeah, and he matched Ernie Clement. Him and Ernie Clement had the most defensive runs saved this year. And he had a MLB and career best 7 outfield runs saved and 10 assists without a cutoff man. And that's kind of where his value came. And the Guardians have won 7 Fielding Bible Awards in the last 4 years, the most of any team in this time. Cleveland, I don't know if they've had elite defenses, but they've had elite defenders, right? So we're talking about in the last 4 years, they've had 7. 3 of those are Kwan. About another 3 might have been Jimenez. It's just the way of it. So they kind of had 2 elite defenders, but it kind of got me thinking overall as you go through, the whole overall list. And I looked at it. Again, it's a very smart voter, Eduardo Perez, who's a name you would know. I was trying to think who else is in here. Travis Sawchuk, I think is an Ohio guy. Saras, Mark Simon is the writer who sent out the email. There's Joe Sheehan, a lot of people who get to vote on these awards. So it's not just necessarily the numbers. There's a lot of pieces, parts, and components. And it got me thinking. So we know offensively, center field and right field were bad. But when you dive into the defensive run saved, and when you just look at about any metric, even if you're like, well, I don't love that metric, you go look at outs above average, you look at anything like that. Angel Martinez, I believe, had the most innings of any player on this team in center field, and he was a terrible defender. -10, I believe, by their stat. Nolan Jones, most innings of any player on this team in right field, a -8. I want to say off the top of my head on both those. It could be wrong. So you have right field and center field where they were not just bad offensively, but they were bad defensively. You were getting massive negative value from both of those spots. And one thing we forgot to talk about was towards the end of the year, we promised, I had an outside the box player. I wanted Cleveland to add to their roster and add to the postseason roster. And I kind of wish they had done this now. And we forgot then to bring it up and mention it. We ran out of time. I had a few people in the comments like, well, who was it? Who were you intrigued by? And the name at the time was Jose Siri. And I bring this up now because Jose Siri, there's a lot of issues with that guy's game. But if you go and you look at it, contact, getting on base, all of those, he hits the ball hard, he runs really fast, and he plays an elite defensive center field. And he was free. And I bring this up because it is expensive. It's a bad free agent market. I'll keep saying that. Like, you're going to have to trust in your internal options. And there are people who in the comments seem to think every minor leaguer is going to be successful. That's not the way of it. Like, we have seen so many really talented, players, guys who have destroyed the minors, get up to the majors and they can't do anything. So there's such a separator there that's really hard to say for sure anyone is going to be a safe bet. Right now, Chase DeLauder feels like a safe bet. I don't know if any of the other guys you really say, yes, 100%. Like, I mean, Kafis had his ups and downs last year. I don't think I'm ready to say like he is, a for sure guy who's going to start the year at the team. We'll have to see. The only guys you can say they're for sure is when they're a guy who have proven that they can produce every year. Like, if I was going to chase a hitter in free agency, maybe it's not the most exciting guy, but I'd go for Mike Yastrzemski because last 5 years he's had an above average league production, and the range wasn't as strong this year, but he's kind of like a right field version of Kwan, where he doesn't chase, he doesn't whiff, he walks. He's got a little more power, but he gets by with base running and defensive value, and has a really strong arm. And that's, trying to find ways to improve. I guess the bottom line for me here is, even if they can't be sure they're going to get offensive improvement, then they should look for ways they can, at least with backups who, if push comes to shove, have to play. If DeLauder gets hurt again, if Kafis can't, teams figure him out. One of the biggest things I'm going to talk about at some point this offseason is just how many guys nowadays we see have their best year as rookies. That after that, it's all a bit of a come back to earth, because teams then get tape video and they figure out how to beat players, and players can't adapt. There's a lot of guys who have one huge year and then never get back to it. And yeah, some of that's BABIP luck, but there's just also the league figuring guys out. So I think something they can do in general is maybe raising the defensive floor. Like, if they can't be 100%, I'm not saying you go out and just get, all glove, no bat guys for center field and right field. What I'm saying is find some guys that could be the option. It's better to run that out there than Nolan Jones, who didn't give you either. Go get someone who could play, all three outfield positions, strongly. Maybe they won't have the best arm, but I feel like you want the arm. Like, go get someone who can actually play those positions. Like, Angel Martinez at least brought value where he could hit left-handed pitching, but putting him in center field is a net loss for your team when it's all said and done, because of how inconsistent the offense was and how bad the defense is. So buying offense is expensive. Buying power is the most expensive thing. You can find defense for free often. Now, finding defense that's with a league average hitter, that gets a little pricey as well. But if you can approach league average, that's why they paid Miles Straw. Like, they paid Miles Straw when he was about 10% worse than league average, thinking, oh, we'll get an elite defender in center who's sniffs league average. And that's what he gave Toronto this year. And that was valuable to them. And you're trying to kind of find, I think, similar guys to that, until you get a guy who is, hopefully like a DeLauder, who's going to be 10 to 20% better than the league average. And, seeing some of these waves of young players, get up there. I've never been the biggest Juan Brito guy. But, there's a lot of high level production, even if there's not a position defensively. And hopefully, their chance at getting the most improvement is always going to be the internal options. But when you have a market that feels as bad as this one does and looks as bad as this one does on paper, they might be better off chasing defense and not offense. And that's not what people want to hear. And I know I can already see the negative comments, but I think at the end of the day, and I know that's what they did with Carlos Santana, right? They went for defense and hoped the offense would continue. And I'll say it again, if this team had Carlos Santana on their roster when they faced the Tigers, they might have won game one, because he's making the play at first base that Noel messes up. So there is some valuation in that. It's just unfortunate the way certain things play out. But hopefully, more than anything else, it means we can get away from the Noels, the Martinez, and the Nolan Jones, who were black holes both offensively and defensively and provided no value and sucked away wins. When we come back, we're going to talk about the very, very weird 1993 draft, the longest draft in Guardians history, one that produced two very good players. Unfortunately, most of them did their damage for other teams. On today's Locked On Guardians. The NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in a stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. Though I gotta say, my first NFL experience, Spurgeon wins versus the Titans, -35 degree wind chill. maybe not my best experience, but I remember, right? That's the important thing. It's the experiences you remember. Much more fun experience in the NFL stadium was the clinch a game against the Atlanta Falcons, or getting to be history at the Jacksonville Jaguars game where all the stuff got thrown on the field. I got to experience many parts of Cleveland history, and I would have had even better deals at those games if I had used Game Time. It's the app that gives you the advantage back to fans. It is fast, easy to use, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all fees are included. So the price you see is the price you pay. That's the big thing with buying tickets. How many times have you been like, oh, I've got a good deal? Oh, no, I don't have a good deal. What's going on with this? Game Time is taking that away. They are honest upfront and let you know what the cost is going to be. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that code's LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. '93 draft. It is a weird draft on a lot of levels, and I just want to, me and my closing of tabs. Always a mistake. For Cleveland, it stood out to me as a draft where they had the 11th overall pick, and the player they drafted was kind of more known for being not selected to play on his College World Series team, and then getting a late College World Series in the Olympic team, and getting a late call to go pitch for them. And that was Daron Kirkreit, who they took at 11th overall and paid really well. Here's the problem, though. Cleveland had, so Hank Peters sets up the core of this team for the 90s. I think Kenny Lofton and Omar Vizquel are about the only pieces that John Hart brings in that aren't free agents. He actually does really well at free agency. That was his kind of superpower. But then he comes in, and in, I believe, 91, is it? Yeah, so he replaces Hank Peters in 91. So his scouting staff, they have 92, 93, and 94. And they have 3 picks, 1 second overall, 1 10th, 1 11th, and 1 10th. And, the second overall pick was Paul Shuey. They went with a reliever with the second overall pick. 94, they take Jared Wright, which kind of worked relative to all things. And in between in 93 at the 11th overall pick was Daron Kirkreit from University of California in Riverside. 600,000 bonus, nothing to sneeze at there. The problem is, immediately after Kirkreit was, I went and I looked at this up. They took, Billy Wagner was who Houston took with the next pick out of Ferrum College, who in 1997, the Guardians would draft a left-handed pitcher from when I was doing some research. But Wagner goes after Kirkreit, and then Matt Drews, who got a little more than Kirkreit. The Yankees paid this high school kid. And after that, at the same cost or less as Derek Lee and Chris Carpenter. Torrey Hunter also goes in that first round, as does Jason Varitek. He does not sign, though. And then, the top player, A-Rod, though he doesn't get the most money, that actually goes to Darren Dryford. A good year for Darren's, who went second overall to the Dodgers and got 1.3 as opposed to 1 million that went to A-Rod. Brian Anderson went third overall. It was not necessarily viewed as the strongest draft class. Scott Rowland in round 2 really stands out in terms of value from Jasper High School in Jasper, Indiana. Probably the second best player in this entire class. And this is a time where Cleveland very clearly had a plan, and that was to go pitching. The weird thing about 1993, again, it's John Hart's second year running a draft, is so the old draft system was, the draft went till people said, we're done. At any point, you could say, we're done. We're not drafting any more players. Cleveland went till the 72nd round. They had never, I don't even think they had another year they went into the 70s. They typically tapped out pretty early in the draft. And they actually signed both the 71st and 72nd pick, Pedro Marte from Florida Memorial University. And then Jason Marshall is the latest pick ever, a catcher out of Baylor. Neither of them lasted, I think, even 3 years with the organization, but it was just interesting to see them go that long and that late and get some guys that they apparently had some interest in. You gave them money to go play for you. So Marshall he only lasted 1993. He literally did not, he lasted that 1 year where he was drafted as a depth guy and then was gone from the organization, a senior. I don't know, maybe they're doing somebody a favor, but just interesting that is. I was kind of looking to see, what's a weird draft? And this fits for a lot of reasons as a weird draft for Cleveland. One of the big reasons being the fact that that they had their most picks ever. Now Cleveland went all pitchers early. So mentioned Darren Kirkreit. If you're as old as me, Casey Witten is a name you might remember. I'm in my mid 40s. Casey Witten had a big year in 1995 as a lefty at Akron. I believe it was still Akron or had become Akron by 95. Yeah. And, he was supposed to be one of the next wave. We thought he's kind of breaking out. He's going to be a guy for them, and never really followed up on that. And then J.J. Dunn was their next selection. My cat is trying to destroy the podcast right now. I apologize. Who was a Monsignor Pace High School in Miami, Florida. He lasted all of 3 years at the org. Didn't go well. The first guy to actually get to the big leagues is Travis Driscoll. I don't remember him. He went to Texas Tech. Cleveland sold him to Japan. He came back and signed for a year. And then he'd go on to throw about 200 innings in the big leagues over 4 years in his 30s with other teams. Chris Hansen out of University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. Had to mention someone out of Whitewater was, their next selection. So at the time, and, he's interesting from the point that, like, the year before he was at another Wisconsin D2 school, switched D2 schools, drafted both years, and then got about 3 years and really struggled in the Cleveland organization. But Cleveland felt like they had, I guess, the hitters down, which, I mean, it's hard to argue with that thought process. So they went very pitcher heavy. Unfortunately, the pitcher that was most successful from their draft class is Steve Kline, who they got in the 8th round out of West Virginia, who they traded for Jeff Juden. Kline would go on to pitch almost 800 games in the big leagues, have a WAR of about 10, be a successful pitcher, but they gave him away. And as I was getting ready to record this podcast, I thought back to when I was a kid and saw Steve Kline in AA Akron. And I remembered there was a mom. I wonder what happened to this woman. I would love to hear if she watches the show. But this feels like this was at Canton, not at Akron. This was at Canton, waiting for autographs. And this mom that we had gotten to know during the game stopped and goes, "That's the guy you want to get signed, Steve Kline." It's like he's going to be in the big leagues. That's the player that he's going to have. He's a future big league pitcher. And just knowing, like, what did she see? What happened there? She was right. Like, that was the guy from that team that ended up, when I found the old, book of all the signatures, it was just that moment where an adult told me something where I was like, that's interesting. So it stuck in my mind, and she ended up being very right. And Steve Kline had a really successful big league career. I know, I'm not going to get into anything that's happened since his career is over, because anything would be no, that's not the word I want anyways, but it would be me thinking there's something, and I don't want to put anything on it in case that's not true. But Steve Kline had a great career. Would have been great for Cleveland to have kept him, mostly as a reliever. Still, you can never have enough lefty relievers. And then, one of the ones who got away, Dave Roberts, who's currently in the World Series as a manager. They'd eventually trade for him. But we got to talk about the one they kept and then gave away, which was, so the other big league players from this draft, Roland de la Manza, who was a 15th rounder. He made it up with the Kansas City Royals eventually. Seth Grasinger, who pitched for a while with the Tigers, but Cleveland took him in the 7th round, did not sign him, just like they did not sign Dave Roberts. And Ken Vinning, who I didn't remember at all, who they took in the 62nd round and were also unable to sign. But the big name is Richie Sexson. And the interesting thing with Richie Sexson is a lot of things. 2 things really stood out as running low on time here. One, he was from Prairie High School in Bush Prairie, Washington. We've seen them kind of go back up to the Washington area recently, but it's been a while since they had kind of gone into that area to draft. And what's interesting to me is that there was 6 players drafted out of that high school between 89 and 97. And 2 of them made it to the big leagues, and they're Richie Sexson and Alan Embry. And Embry was in 89 and Sexson was in 93. So I don't even think they really overlapped. A 4-year gap wouldn't lead to that. So I just wonder if that was in a scout's backyard there. Is that why they got both these guys who went on to have solid, major league careers, 1,300 games plus for Sexson, 800 games plus for Embry. But yeah, those are two guys from that school, and I didn't expect to see that when I was looking at the data. The other interesting thing with Richie Sexson, as well, I remember him as this, big time right-handed power hitter, and kind of maybe the last one they internally developed. Call me out if I'm wrong, but who's the last guy they drafted and developed who was a power hitting right-handed bat? The crazy thing is, back during that era, so in 1998, he had that was a very small sample, so in 49 games. So in 99 with them, he played in 134 games, DH first base mostly, and had an 818 OPS. How much would we love to see an 818 on any current Cleveland hitter? And he had 31 home runs, 17 doubles, 7 triples. You're going to end up with 17 triples for his career, so almost half in that one season. Sounds like a great line. His OPS plus that year was 102. That was like league average. Before they traded him in 2000, he had a 774 OPS. He would end up with having, combined home runs that year was 30, 16 with Cleveland, 14 with Milwaukee. And his time in Cleveland, though, the 256, 315, 460, 774 OPS on his way to 30 home runs. He had a 97. I'm sorry, that's their RBAT. That's their equivalent of the WRC plus. He had a 93 OPS plus. So almost an 800 OPS was below league average. Man, the 90s were a wild time, were they not? Basically what happened here, for those who do not know, they traded Richie Sexson. He was the star piece. This team was trying to compete in 2000, trying to go over the top. And they made a great late run. They traded Paul Rigdon, who wasn't much, and Kane Davis, who wasn't much. Jason Beret was in a contract to walk. Steve Woodard was in a contract to walk. They wanted Bob Wickman. They were looking for their closer. And that just all kind of comes back around because, hey, if they had drafted the undersized a year after drafting a potential closer second overall, a guy who had never started in college, if they had just drafted the closer who went one pick over Darren Kirkreit, they would have gotten a Hall of Fame left-handed closer, and we've never had to trade Richie Sexson for one. Baseball is weird sometimes. I hope you enjoyed this walk down memory lane. Maybe you learned something, maybe you didn't. Let me know your thoughts on future segments like this, because the offseason is long and I like digging into the history, but I know it's not everyone's favorite. We are going to talk tomorrow more about the changes with the coaching staff, as well as some more thoughts on your Cleveland Guardians and what else could be changing. Thank you all for joining us. Remember, rate and review, download daily. It helps. And go Guardians, go. I forgot the little end thing. There we go. There's the little end thing if you're watching on YouTube. Thank you all, and go Guardians, go.